we've used up a lot of the question time because of technology, but we do have roughly about bit more than 10 minutes of question time. I mean, all the way through your presentation, Mark, the question that was coming to my mind, what are the operational synergies between chocolate and pet food? But I'm sure there's better questions than that one. So just please, we'll do a little quick chatty session. So please put your hand up, say who you are, where you're from, and speak loudly. We won't do, we do have microphones, but yes, we do have microphones. Wait for the microphone, please. Okay. Kylie, down here, down the front.
Hi, thank you. Is that working?
Yep.
Oh, excellent. Good work, thank you. My question was actually for Mark, and from the slide you put up about the forces shaping demands for pet care, and you said around the consumer preference for non-GMO. Obviously, you do a lot of market research. Is that a strong indicator that for pet food people are even concerned about sourcing non-GMO products?
Yeah, I'm really glad I left that picture on there. But, you know, you're right. Look, it is an issue. It is a concern. I mean, they're ones that we get feedback on, not regularly, but a lot of people are asked a question about it. So it's something that we're starting to see take shape. Do I have an answer for you today on what that means? Not really, to be brutally honest. But, you know, we do get questions a lot about that and what the impact is and what it means. And a lot of it's to do, probably more to that humanisation piece where the person has that feeling for themselves and that's how they portray it for their pet.
And in a price-sensitive market, would you be willing to pay a price premium for non-GMO as opposed to GMO?
Yeah, great question. Short answer, it is very relative to the recipe it goes into. We've got a multiple different variety of brands. The brands that you see in the premium pet stores, the vets, they will probably absorb that a lot more than what you would for the ones on the bottom of the supermarket shelf. So yeah, a bit like what we're sort of alluding to, where we want to tailor supply chains to suit our factory. It's effectively tailoring the supply chain to suit those customers' demands. So certain markets will. It's not an easy fix like it's for pet food. You ask about pet food and chocolate, all the factories in Mars are exactly the same. You can walk into any of them and have the same quality standards, which makes it really difficult with pet food, where the chocolate guys only have 3 or 4 different raw materials. Pet food has hundreds. So it is price sensitive to a certain degree, and it's very hard to manage all those raw materials, especially on small SKUs and small volumes that get made. So,
anything else? Duncan, you said your motto, safe feed for food. Mark, you talked about supply chain traceability. I'm pretty sure that Robin, you mentioned similar sort of opportunities. As an industry, end to end, how do we capture value out of it? We talk a lot about it, but how do we actually, all the way from the grower, all the way through the value chain, how do we capture value out of traceability?
I think,
who wants to have a go?
I'll go. My reference to Sunblest and their recent campaign on Closer to Home Than You Think, and picking up on visiting a grower of some of the wheat, but unfortunately, because the supply chain for grains is so big, it's very hard to isolate or contain, segregate, whether that be in the handler, even into a miller such as Maori, where you've got significant hundreds of tonnes on site at any one time in multiple silos. So I think it's how do we try and help the industry get some of that, I'll call it definition. How can we ring fence certain parcels of grain to enable food manufacturers, in this case pet food manufacturers, to be able to isolate and bring that to life? And that's where I believe you'll get the value, is consumers will pay for traceability if they believe in it. So I think it's that whole integrity proposition that consumers are looking for more and more today.
Good. Brent? Oh, sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Owen Atkin.
Owen, sorry.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm from ANU. It's a question actually, I think, for Ross. I'm a bit naive about this sort of space, but if we have a situation where we had droughts more frequently, and we get into a situation where we stop exporting in some cases in order to meet internal market demand, and population growth increases that demand, do we ever get into a situation where externally some of our markets in Southeast Asia stop buying from us because we become an unreliable supplier? Is that a long-term risk where the increasing frequency of droughts becomes a problem structurally in terms of our export markets?
That's already evident and an issue. So the anecdotes are that because we, in the last handful of years, have been an unreliable supplier to Indonesia because of the greater domestic price that's attracted grain out of Western Australia and South Australia into Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria. The response of the Indonesians, quite wisely, has been to source grain from elsewhere. And what that has meant is that the millers in Indonesia have become technically competent at incorporating black seed grain in their flour mixes. And once the technicians become technically competent and comfortable with doing that, they're quite comfortable to repeat that. So that it just means that you do get not only priced out of those markets in the short term, but also in the medium term, because the perception is that you're not as reliable as you used to, and therefore they, like us, will use risk management to spread the risk of supply, which means they will have a higher proportion of grain from other origins in Australia in their mixes in order to circumvent and lessen the risk of being solely exposed to Australia. So you're right that one of the consequences of drought and one of the consequences of a growing domestic market is that if we can't maintain our production levels, we become a less reliable and therefore more opportunistic exporter.
Very good point. I'm going to make a quick comment on that one. You know, I'm not advocating for a single desk, but back in the single desk era, AWB managed their best. They stockpiled grain to essentially ensure that their most premium paying customers were maintained supply. Can we, in a modern open market, essentially think of ways of being able to do this? And I think that's a big challenge for the industry. We've got a question right here.
Hi, Andrew Whitelaw from Mikado. It's a question for stocking manufacturers and Mark. Mark, you mentioned the Black Swan events. We've probably had the biggest Black Swan event of our lifetimes over the last 2 months. Are you finding that things like your micro-ingredients, amino acids, vitamins, etc., with the disruption in supply chains, are we going to see issues of getting availability of supply due to coronavirus? Because most of them generally tend to come from China, or a lot of products do. Are you starting to feel the heat on that?
Yeah, well, just talking about this before this session started, absolutely. So we're facing risks right now. We've got stock on hand for most of our plants in Australia for the next couple of months. There's also our plants in China are facing it right now as well. So there is a real risk at the moment. The logistics is an absolute nightmare, which I think we all know. It's been, micro by name, and it's been micro-managed daily at the moment. So it's going to be quite a challenge now. How that unfolds over the next two weeks is a risk. So for us, our R&D teams are working pretty feverishly at the moment just to understand what the alternative is, what the inclusion levels are, and how we play that out just to maintain hopefully some product security. But it does really highlight the risk that you have these days in having one origin as your only source and trying to make sure you've got multiple supply chains that can work.
I've got a quick one for Robin. How do you, as a domestic milling industry, essentially manage the dichotomy of export versus domestic pull? and the different needs of export. So you talked about from using a rapid dough baking, and that balance was critical, and that mixing time, you wanted low mixing time. The export market doesn't care about mixing time. They don't care about balance. Even a premium product like Dark Northern Spring is very, very unbalanced. And that's where the whole system goes towards that product. So how do we deal with that as an industry?
From a milling baking perspective, we've consciously said we're not going to export. So that makes it quite simple for us that we know what we have to buy to meet our domestic demand. But you're right, in terms of if you were to go into export markets where they're making different foods that require different attributes from wheat flour, trying to ensure that you meet those requirements would be challenging. So, and Ross, I think you've touched on that in terms of just population growth and diets changing, and it's not that far away. And I think if the Australian grains industry wants to really capitalise on that, truly understanding what those critical attributes are that need to come from wheat into flour, in this case, to meet, whether it be a noodle product or a flatbread style product, what are those things that are absolutely essential to be successful in that export market?
One quick one for Duncan. You talked a lot about biosecurity and how seriously your industry takes biosecurity, but I mean, how hard is it to really get that buy-in from all your members and in actually living that up?
It's actually just a part of life. I mean, biosecurity and animal health go hand in fist, and we really need to make that our number one. What we're doing at the end of the day is feeding animals for their health and well-being and production, and the production only improves when the animal's health and well-being is at its highest level. So biosecurity for us, we have a bridge, we're the bridge between the grains industry and plant production and livestock production, and we sort of bring the two together. We're an aggregator of product, so we get to see a lot of grain, roughages, different contaminants and diseases and pests coming through our weigh bridges as that, and we need to be able to report back so that our biosecurity system domestically is operating properly, and the same when we send that product across to livestock. It's again what we feed is consumed and passed down the chain. It really is. Traceability comes into that very strongly as well, and imported product, traceability of that imported product once it arrives in Australia, we need to know where it's gone to and how to manage that. Also where product comes from, so that if there's a product recall for a contaminant reason, a chemical contaminant, we can actually trace that back and make sure that we've got that in place. And biosecurity is the fundamental reason why we do it. If we don't make value from traceability, I don't care, because at the end of the day we get to survive.
Yep. Good. Right. Last question, Ross. You talked about the big opportunity in Indonesia for instant noodles, and that fitted particularly a Western Australian market of lower protein. We're talking about a growing domestic feed market that is after carbohydrates, so protein's not a big issue. However, all of those markets are low paying markets. Even soft cakes and biscuits are low paying markets. The premium is in high protein. What do we do about that? How can we turn that back, particularly in Western Australia? It's, if I understand 2 years ago, 3.7 million tonnes under 9.5% protein. That's Robin, that's unusable, isn't it?
Unusable and no good for bread making, as I showed you. Good for biscuits though, or noodles.
So for me, I think the strategic opportunity lies in value adding to that low value grain through a complementary enterprise. So I sometimes say to farmers, particularly sheep farmers, I ask them the question, who is your Black Sea equivalent? And it used to be if you're a sheep farmer in New Zealand. And the answer is, well, New Zealand's shifted into dairying. So there aren't too many sheep export competitors. So for me, Australia's comparative advantage might be in the next decade being committed to sheep and wool production and using low-value grain to actually produce meat and wool and rekindle the size of the sheep flock. That may be, so putting that grain down the throat of a sheep might be a more profitable strategy than putting it on a boat to Indonesia. So that'd be where I think the mixed enterprise farming systems might need to head over the next decade with respect to grain, is making money out of local complementary enterprises.
Not good news for the grains industry, Ross.
Well, last week in Dubbo, when I was there, lambs were $300 a head.
Very good. Look, thank you for staying on for an extra 5 minutes. I think all speakers coped amazingly well with the disruption of the technology and gave some really professional presentations under a lot of duress. So, and it was a really good story, really interesting stories from everybody. So please join me in thanking all the presenters.